recessions only accelerate and reveal structural changes. I think the structural change for our industry is the most important one. We're going through the transition to the information age, the democratization of the technology, in which I think there is a big future, and in fact a defining future for the professional journalist, but I just genuinely think there are going to be fewer of us.
It's devastating for the journalists, isn't it? We've lost 500 jobs in local newspapers in the last 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this, the advertising, we call it the canary in the coal mine of a recession. It always falls off its perch first. I remember it in the 2000 recession, going from double shifting at Reed Elsevier to literally employing people.
That's where you were working.
Where I was literally employing people on double shift to use the machines as long as we could to produce huge issues, advertising driven, and within 3 months, titles being closed. So I think we're at the beginning of that again. But look, advertising isn't going to go away. I think that from peak to trough, advertising recessions are barely, more than, say, they lose a third of the value. If we are in an advertising-driven world still in the media, and large parts of it are, then it's not going to disappear. I mean, it is worrying for people at the local level, and there has to be, I think, a new model come about who funds, what is the economic model for funding local news.
And what about journalist jobs? I mean, will there be more or less?
Well, I just think there's going to be less journalists. I mean, it's not the recession that's doing that. It is the de-skilling of and the rise of new technology. The camera we're filming this interview on can be used with after a day's training by a 16-year-old. They're not going to win the Pulitzer Prize, but they can do it, and we have to. That's not going to change. I think it's a question of whether you accept it, but I think what you have to do is to try and define what the skilled class of professional journalists actually does in that world. What makes us worth employing? And I'm very robust about it. I think the world, we're going into an information age. We are the ones who provide accurate information. We're not going to disappear.
But what about preserving quality journalism, the difference between the stuff that trained journalists produce and the poor stuff that badly trained people can do?
Exactly. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, already, how many actual bloggers are authoritative? The actual individual bloggers are not. People don't turn to them. On the very odd occasion at the beginning of blogging, when I think probably American journalism and European journalism and British journalism, in a way, a little bit caught with their pants down by the odd blogger who was able to break a story.
You can have lucky hits with the amateurs, but how do we keep quality journalism?
So how do you keep it is, I think, you focus on what it uniquely does. It's the peer review aspect of it. It's not just the accuracy of it. Let's take the obvious things. The accuracy, the authority. So if I see something happening and I write it down and I go to my editor and say, this is what I saw, it is different from somebody who's not trained and qualified to do it. Likewise, that person isn't going to get through that big iron gate at the front of Downing Street. I am. We have that function, the authority and the quality. But on top of that, I think it's the peer review. A newsroom is a real-time peer review mechanism with people in a very tough and abrasive relationship with each other that bloggers in their pajamas just cannot replicate. That's it. It's actually what I'm saying is it's not the individuality of the skill of the journalist.
In the short term, what can the union do about the job losses at the moment?
You mean specifically in the local
Mainly,
press?
Well, in local and in national media.
Well, I think you have to, as a union rep on Newsnight at the BBC, you have to try and defend everyone. Certainly defend every person. This is what we've done. We have lost at the BBC hundreds, probably thousands, but hundreds of journalists' jobs without any, as far as I'm aware, and maybe one or two compulsory redundancies. Now, after a while, this becomes a depressing process, as you know, to defend people rather than jobs. But I think what we have to do is therefore have a say in the shaping of the eventual operation. Because none of these people who are designing these multimedia newsrooms, whether it's Will Lewis at the Telegraph, Peter Horrocks at the BBC, none of them have much of a model to go from. And these are ultimately human organisations, and the union, you know, can be the collective brain in some senses of what works, what doesn't, what kind of risks there are to people who work in these new situations, and what it does to journalism. This is all, I think, I know I'm talking again about broadcast, that's the core, and I think it's equally applicable, as our colleagues in the Telegraph know all too well, to that Telegraph multimedia newsroom as it is to the BBC's one.
The industry is being shaken up.
Yep.
What role can the union play in shaping the future?
I think we have to be the guardians of a craft and a profession. I probably never thought I would say this because I used to hate craft unions and the idea of unions that guarded privileges. We're not guarding a privilege, we're guarding principles. You know, if we go into an information age where the professional gatherers of reliable information in real time, you know, can carve out a niche for themselves that it needs to be carved out, which is that they retain their authority. They retain, what I mean by the privilege is the privilege of walking into Downing Street and saying to Gordon Brown, don't you feel like apologising for what you've unleashed on the UK financial markets? I can do that. Guido Fawkes can't. And that's going to be a fact of life no matter what technological changes happen. So we have to define our new role. But I think we have to define it, I think we have to engage the media bosses and in a way shock them with our audacity of the way we see the future.